Is Confluence Premium worth it? Is it worth doubling your price for a handful of new features? Let's talk about it. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Drop a like if you get value out of this video. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know in the comment section below. Let's talk about if it's worth paying 2 times as much for Confluence Premium. Most of you, I'm willing to bet, are on Confluence Standard. And if you're watching this video, you're probably asking yourself, are the handful of features that you get when you upgrade to Confluence Premium worth doubling your bill? Let's take a look. So first of all, the price, I just wanted to talk about the price. As you can see, Standard is $5.75 and Premium gets you all the way up to $11, essentially doubling your bill. So what are you getting for this extra increase in your monthly bill? Well, let's take a look. Atlassian, as a summary, as a highlight view, will tell you that you're going to get unlimited storage, analytics, 24/7 support, 99% uptime, team calendars, and IP allow listing. But what exactly does this mean? And what does it mean to you? And most importantly, is it worth the extra money? Because you are doubling your bill here. And so is it worth paying twice as much for a handful of features? Well, let's look at each one of these in a little bit more detail and discuss the pros and the cons, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And at the end, I'll give you my expert level opinion. Okay, so we're just going to come down here and we're going to compare the features. And as you can see, I'm not going to list everything up because these are features that you're going to get across the board. But what we're going to focus on these extra features down here where you get a check mark here under Premium, but you don't get a check mark under Standard. And we're going to compare those two. I'm going to try to see if I can make it clear to you so you understand what these functionalities are, and then are you actually going to use them? Because it's one thing to pay twice as much for features, and it's another thing about paying twice as much and then not using those features. So are you actually going to use those features? So the first one's analytics. And I can click into it, and Jira is going to give you a little bit of an informational thing, right? And so what analytics is, and this is a fairly new thing, something that Atlassian has been rolling out very recently, but you'll be able to filter your space, site, page level reports to understand user engagement and make better decisions about resources and content. Basically, you're going to find out who and how your teams are using Confluence. So this doesn't seem like a feature that I would want to pay twice as much for, because if anything, it's a feature that's, when I'm paying twice as much, it'll help me understand if I should go down a level. So I'm not really sure why this is something you would want to pay twice as much. So I'm going to basically null this one out because I don't think analytics is going to benefit you, and you should definitely not be doubling your bill for this analytic functionality. Let's take a look at the next one. Inspect permissions. Understand all active permissions for a specific user in one place so you can address issues quickly. This right here is kind of worth it for me, but I'm coming in with my Confluence administrator hat. As an administrator, this would make my job a heck of a lot easier. Is it worth, though, for one or two, maybe a handful of administrators that you have in your company, is it worth doubling the price for all the other users? Probably not. I think this is one of those things where you do want to do a pros and cons analysis, and you want to ask your administrators, how much time are you spending trying to figure out user level problems, permission problems, access problems? And if they're only spending a couple of hours a month, a couple of hours every few months, then you got to compare that with, well, what does that cost of investing in that labor hour? How does that compare with doubling that bill? And I'm willing to bet that most of your administrators, assuming you have some good ones, they're probably not suffering too much, and I'm pretty sure they're able to troubleshoot fairly well. And I'm going to basically cross this one out as making it null as well, because I don't think that you should be investing twice as much in order to make the lives of a few easier. I think the cost is significant. I think, again, doubling your price is a pretty significant investment here. And if you were just going to go solely on, can I make a couple of administrators' lives easier, I would probably vote against it, just because it's not something that I usually spend too much time in. But if your administrators are struggling and they're just like every day, all day, it's somebody new, some new problem, they're trying to figure it out, and they're just spending basically an 8-hour day or an entire week's worth of work always doing this, then at that point your labor hours are probably going to be a lot more tipped over that way. and upgrading and making their lives easier is probably going to be a better solution. So you do need to compare. I think this is going to be very unique to each individual company, but that's some of the considerations that I would take when looking at the inspect permissions. Next up, we got bulk archive pages. File away multiple outdated pages at once and keep your page trees tidy. I think this is one of those things where it's a nice to have. You can always delete the page. You can always not use the page. You can always like group all the pages and put them in somewhere else. You can always create another space, move all those unused pages over there. There's a lot of different options that you would have. Some might be good, some might be bad, but paying double to be able to clean up and tidy up, definitely not something I would recommend you do. And so I'm going to strike this one as well. I will not be trying to convince you to double up your bill in order to just tidy things up. Let's talk about the next one, team calendars. Now the team calendars is interesting. I actually really like this one. You're able to share and embed team calendars so your teams can communicate availability and stay organized. I think this one's really good. And if you don't have another calendar application, this would be one of the reasons why I would upgrade. Now, I will tell you that Jira, there are some plugins because there's really, in Jira software, there's really no calendar functionality. And so there is a plugin, there's a couple of plugins actually, that you can leverage over there on the Jira side to add calendars so that your teams can organize a little bit more. And I would recommend that you compare and contrast the cost of just getting a calendar plugin in Jira versus getting the team calendar here. Now just keep in mind that if your user base is one-to-one, you have one Jira software user for one Confluence user, your prices, you're going to want to compare that, right? Because if you enable the plugin in Jira for just calendar for like $100 a month, and then Confluence is going to bill you up to $200 a month, you want to compare and see if your teams are actually going to use it, are they going to benefit from it. But this is one that I would actually consider. I would urge you to kind of go run the numbers on this one and find out, is it worth it for this one? Next up, we got automations. Now this is a fairly new functionality. This is something that's been in Jira for a really long time, and it's just making its way over to Confluence. Now, when you upgrade to Confluence Premium, you're going to get this functionality, but this is still in a very infant stage. As of this point, as of this video, I wouldn't invest doubling that price just for this functionality. I think it's going to be great. I see how powerful it is inside of Jira, but it's just still too kind of new, not really buggy, but just not enough traction, not enough momentum on the Confluence side to warrant doubling that price. And what strikes me as most interesting is on the Jira side, automation is basically included in the standard and in the premium. So it's really interesting here that Atlassian went this route where you only get it if you're a premium user or not. But for this one, I'm kind of on the fence. I like automation, but just with the examples that I've done and the little time that I spent, I would not invest doubling your price just for automation. Let's keep going down the list. For this data and insights, this isn't enterprise only stuff, so not in the scope of this video, and it's also coming soon. And in my opinion, I've used it on Jira side, not worth it, unless you got a PhD in data science, because this stuff is hard. Next up, we'll go to admin controls. Now this is where things start getting interesting. This is where I would now start saying, hey, going to premium is going to be worth it. So let's talk about what you are getting here. First, the admin key. This is really cool. With an admin key, site admins can troubleshoot and diagnose problems faster by getting temporary access to restricted pages. Page authors receive an email. Basically, you get a backdoor. You get a master key that can access every single space, every single page, and regardless of whether you have permissions or restrictions or whatever it is, your site level administrators will have that key and be able to access any page and help troubleshoot. This is really helpful when somebody added a restriction, they left, and nobody's around that has the right power. Without this permission here, without this power, it gets very challenging. It is super tricky to get that space back. And so this right here would be worth it. But my advice here would be, maybe if this is your only reason why you're upgrading a premium, I would upgrade to premium, take care of your affairs, and then downgrade back to standard. Because unless you're constantly locking yourself out, you're not going to need that master key all the time. Copy space permissions. Clone space permissions from one space to another and save time and steer clear of mistakes. This, a little bit on the fence. It's very beneficial. You kind of do want to standardize. It just depends on your policies and how your team works. But for the most part, standardizing and having the same set of permissions is a good idea. And this would be, I would lean towards, yeah, let's upgrade to premium so that we can standardize our permissions. Otherwise, you get a hodgepodge of just different spaces with different permissions, and it just becomes a maintenance nightmare. And so this would be somewhat of a really good reason to move over to premium. Admin insights. See product usage, activity, security trends over time. So this one, I think it's a fairly newer thing as well. I wouldn't upgrade just for this. It just gives you a little bit more information, a little bit more 411 as to what and how your teams are using Confluence, but definitely not worth doubling your price for. The next one's Sandbox. Now this stuff here, this in Confluence is interesting because in Jira software, I love the Sandbox because you're always doing all kinds of configuration changes, workflow changes, adding new fields, doing a bunch of Jira stuff. But as a Confluence administrator, my role is very low key, not as involved as it is with Jira. So I wouldn't recommend upgrading for the Sandbox privilege only. If we were talking about Jira software, 100% that functionality by itself is worth every penny. But in the Confluence, I just don't do as much administrative things, at least things that would be risky to warrant practicing in a Sandbox. So that's my 2 cents there. And then finally, we got release tracks here. And the release tracks, I don't know that I would want to use this in Confluence because the release tracks exist in Jira where you're doing the software. And so maybe from a documentation perspective, I haven't actually used release tracks, but this is something that I'm going to maybe try out this week. I'll come back and report to you in a future video. But given the fact that you can do releases in Jira and you're probably already paying for Jira Premium, I would kind of just leave those over there. But I will be investigating release tracks in Confluence and see if it's actually worth it. And then what else do we get? So we get a couple of other things. We get IP allow listing down here. Unless you're really, really strict about cybersecurity and you're intentionally blocking out IPs, not really worth it. But let's talk about the last couple of things. Let's talk about storage, support, and guaranteed uptime. For storage and support, that would be the reason why I would upgrade. Now, I will say that with a big giant asterisk because if your team's using like Google Drive or Teams or something else to store documents, then scratch my last statement. But if your team is relying on Confluence to upload documentation, videos, instructions, how-to, manuals, basically they're uploading a lot of media to Confluence, that 250 gigabytes is going to run out real quick. And so having unlimited storage will encourage your team to essentially document and put everything inside of Confluence. So that right there would be the reason why I doubled the price. The 24/7 premium support, not worth it. I think Atlassian, for the most part, they do a general good job in doing premium support, but because everything's over tickets, even if you have an emergency, it's going to be days. Sometimes it could be days before you actually get a resolution. Not something that I would be willing to pay double for because even if you have a problem at like 1 a.m., it's still going to take them a few hours to pick up the ticket. And then it's going to take a few more hours after that, depending on the problem, to actually resolve your ticket. So if it could wait for local business hours, I would just wait for local business hours, but I definitely wouldn't pay double the price so that I can basically wait overnight. And the final one is guaranteed uptime of 99.9%. I'll give you my experience with Atlassian. Atlassian generally doesn't go down, but in those rare occasions where it does go down, there's nothing you can do. You can submit a ticket, and you could potentially get some reimbursements, but if Jira or Confluence goes down, it goes down. There isn't anything you're going to do. So even though they advertise a 99.9% uptime, I can personally tell you that over this last 12 months, I've suffered from 2 Jira outages with one of my teams. And so even though they advertise it, it's nice to have, but definitely not worth upgrading twice the price. So that's pretty much it. That's all you get if you upgrade to premium. So is it worth it? In my humble opinion, in my expert level opinion, my answer is going to be no. Unless you're consistently running into these administrative problems where people are locked out and or people just can't access pages and your admins are just scratching their head because they can't figure it out, I cannot justify doubling your price. So I would happily stay on standard unless, of course, you hit those 2 things, right? Where your admins are really struggling. And obviously the one I talked here about the end, which was the unlimited storage, right? Because if you're relying on Confluence for putting all your documentation, then double up the price. But if you have like a Dropbox or a Google Drive or Microsoft Teams, Office, OneDrive 365, whatever you want to call it, I would leverage that and then just do soft links back into Confluence. But that shouldn't take up a whole lot of space. So anyways, that's it for this video. I know it was a little bit long, but I wanted to go over everything, over all the details, and give you my expert level opinion so that you have all of the information you need to make this very, very important decision. Because doubling your price, especially in this era that we're in of efficiencies and cutting back budgets, you want to ask yourself, is it worth it? And you can also flip the script. If you're currently on Confluence Premium, should you be on Confluence Premium? Probably not, unless you're actually using one of the things that I called out. Otherwise, I'd recommend save a couple bucks, downgrade to Standard, and I'm sure you're going to be just fine. But don't come after me, please. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know in the comment section below. If you made it this far, you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. It's completely free to you. And if you like this video, or maybe if you didn't, hit that like button. It really does help the channel grow. And make sure you check out the description for all my links so you can find my paid courses and everything else that is going on in my life so you can follow along the journey and help support the channel. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's only worth it if you work for it. It's only worth it if you work for it. I won't stop till they hear me now.